major clash is now unfolding between President Trump and his battle against some of America's top universities, announcing this evening more than $2.2 billion in federal funding has been frozen for multi-year grants and contracts at Harvard. That comes after Harvard said tonight that it was rejecting a list of demands from the administration on sweeping changes and would fight back against them. Those demands came from a federal task force that the administration says is combating anti-Semitism on college campuses following protests against the war in Gaza. But the list of demands included things like dismantling diversity initiatives, auditing academic and hiring practices, and also installing leaders who are committed, the White House said, to implementing the changes they want to see. We saw a response from Harvard tonight, and the legal team responding to that saying, quote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government." Now, Harvard's $9 billion that's at stake here is just a fraction of the billions that the Trump administration has been targeting at schools across the country. Harvard's decision, though, appears to be the first time that we have seen a school directly refusing to comply. This comes as the Harvard faculty chapter of the American Association of University Professors and its national counterparts sued the Trump administration. My source tonight is the Harvard law professor and general counsel of the organization at the heart of this lawsuit. Andrew Manuel Crespo is here in his first TV interview since that suit was filed. And so thank you so much, sir, for being here. Given all of these developments happening tonight, can I first just get your response to the administration saying tonight that it's going to have this $2.2 billion freeze? What kind of impact does that have?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And while this cut is obviously deeply disappointing and a real blow, not just to Harvard, but to higher education across the United States, it's not exactly unexpected. The Trump administration has been threatening to withhold and then withholding millions and then billions of dollars from some of the leading institutions of higher education in the country. The impacts of those cuts will be severe. Not just to cutting-edge research, cures for cancer, cures for diseases, studies that try to understand the most cutting-edge technology, but also all of the work that happens at these universities with respect to how we study our history, the things that are essential to our democracy. There's a lot that happens at these universities that are essential to having a free democracy, and that's, I think, exactly the reason why they're all under attack. So the impact is significant, but I'm really proud to see Harvard standing up to fight.
Well, you filed your lawsuit before we saw how Harvard was going to respond tonight, and essentially you were arguing that the threat to cut this funding violates free speech and other First Amendment rights here. Given Harvard is the first school that we've seen respond this way, how does that impact your lawsuit, and what does that mean for this going forward?
Well, I think the Trump administration's decision to cut $2.2 billion from Harvard tonight makes clear just how essential this lawsuit is and how critical this fight is, and why it's so important for Harvard and really every university in the country to take a stand at this critical moment, because this is a clear, unquestionable violation of First Amendment rights. You mentioned some of the demands that the administration has made of Harvard. It includes things like trying to appoint a federally named oversight official to do an audit of every course, every department at Harvard to see if we have ideological balance to meet the Trump administration's test for what we teach and what we say at these universities. It's a transparent effort to change what is taught, what we say in our classrooms, what we teach our students, to make sure that the only things that are actually said on university campuses are things that the Trump administration wants to hear and wants to be said. This is a move that happens in countries across the world when there are efforts to try to make an authoritarian play in government. Institutions that are essential to civil society, like the press, like the courts, like the legal profession, and universities are the first to come under attack. And that's what we've been seeing over the first few weeks of this administration, with that attack on universities coming full and hard now. And this is the moment when it's so essential for those universities to take a stand. And if there's any university in the world that has the resources to do that and the moral leadership to do that, it's Harvard. And I'm proud to call myself a member of this faculty today.
And so when the administration is arguing that this is actually about combating anti-Semitism and how we saw a lot of these schools handle this last year as the war in Gaza was playing out, and the attorneys acknowledged tonight in their letter denying that they're going to comply with the demands, they say, quote, Harvard is a very different place than it was a year ago. You're saying you don't essentially buy that that is what the administration is trying to accomplish here.
That's exactly right. Look, I've spent my professional life fighting racism and intolerance in the United States. Anti-Semitism is vile and has no place in this country. But these actions are not about anti-Semitism, they're about authoritarianism. And we know that because we can see what the Trump administration has said and what it has done. This is a president who, when he was campaigning for office, said that he didn't like what was taught at America's universities and that he was going to bankrupt them unless they started teaching something different. We can see this when we see the head of the task force that's responsible for these investigations saying that this is about ideological viewpoint balancing at these universities. We can see it when we see the Vice President of the United States say that universities and their professors are the enemy. This is not about anti-Semitism. This is about an effort to try to break the backs of American universities until they start saying what the administration wants to hear. Because the administration knows that universities are a central component of a free and open constitutional democracy. The Trump administration's demand letter that was made public today and sent to Harvard on Friday asks for things that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It requires us to try to change who is hired, what we teach in our classrooms, what we say in our research. It says that it is trying to create ideological rebalancing. That's code, and actually not even code. It's pretty transparent. That is a message that's saying, we don't like what you're teaching. We want you to teach something more to our liking. And unless you do that, we're going to try to bankrupt your institution.
We'll be following it closely. Andrew Manuel Crespo, thank you for joining us tonight for an interview.
Schools that persist in explicit, unlawful discrimination under the guise of equity will not only have their endowments taxed, but through budget reconciliation, I will advance a measure to have them fined up to the entire amount of their endowment.
I think if any of us want to do the things that we want to do for our country and for the people who live in it, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
Joining the group chat today, Phil Mattingly, CNN anchor and chief domestic correspondent, Gabby Birnbaum, Washington correspondent for the Nevada Independent, and Kevin Fry, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One. Everybody, I want to just start with what the president is trying to do, because in that old clip we played, he talked about taxing endowments, which is not what he's doing, right? He's specifically saying, here's a list of demands, comply, or I'm going after your federal funding. So sort of who in the administration is pushing this? What can you tell us about the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, why slog through a legislative process that you don't know how it's going to end when you can just do it yourself? And I think this is so people cannot view what's happening here in isolation, right? We've been talking about this for the last several months, where the agility and kind of relentless nature with which the Trump administration and top senior advisors who have been planning for this for several years have really, to your point, initially bent institutions that never saw this coming, even though Trump talked about it on the campaign trail, to their will, has been something that people are just starting to kind of get their head around. And Harvard being the first school to say no is a fascinating moment to see whether this is the start of a tipping point.
And if there's any school that can do it, it's Harvard. It has a massive endowment. But meanwhile, Columbia faced a similar predicament, quickly caved. Kevin, talk about the dynamics there that are different.
Right. I mean, look, they were the center point of the anti-Semitism accusations early on. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik and other top lawmakers in Washington have been very loudly condemning what happened there, because they really became the face of the protest movement.
And that made them vulnerable to public backlash and vulnerable to political backlash.
Correct. And you also saw those dramatic images that played out when you saw the police go onto campus and they took over the building. And I mean, this kind of built and built and built. And so they were already under the microscope in that respect. And then they come in and they basically comply with a lot of what the administration is looking for, including sort of this mask ban and other sort of curriculum oversight, including on their Middle East studies program. And then on top of that, there's now conversations about whether or not there should be some sort of judicial oversight of whether or not they are in compliance.
Right. I don't want to just skip by some of the things you said. Oversight into actual curriculum. So we want to tell you, or at least be able to look at what you're teaching, which is ironic since they're kind of dismantling the ed department. But they want to do this in higher ed. Democrats and their allies coming to universities' defense. Here's a sense of what they've been saying.
Is putting pressure on universities as well. Good news is Harvard University today said, go to hell.
That may break the fever. I really hope it does. I do know this. If Harvard had capitulated, I really fear for what next year would be.
There are things that matter more than simply the size of one's endowment. We need the presidents to be banding together and standing up for free expression.
Gabby, I probably could have stopped with Clyburn because he really lays out the stakes, but what are you hearing in congressional delegations? What are you hearing in your reporting about people seeing this as like a pivotal moment?
I think Democrats in general have been waiting for somebody, some institution, some group to stand up and say, you know, we're not going to abide by this. And I think Harvard, right, the big dog of academia doing it, I think we'll see, but I would imagine gives permission for some smaller universities, those with endowments that aren't as large, that don't have that, you know, multiple hundreds of years history to say we can outlast any one political moment or administration, to sort of band with them. And I think we'll see some former Biden legal officials have talked about law firms need to do the same, that if they stand together, it'll be easier to stand against some of this rhetoric and action coming from the Trump administration. And so I'll see what moves forward.